This is the High Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. I'm Eric Balkman from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour and the FFPC. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Balkman and the FFPC on Twitter at FFPC. Before we get into the show, I want to remind everyone that you can get a listeners-only 10% discount to RotoViz by using the code RVRadio2022. That's RVRADIO2022. Your subscription gives you unlimited access to all of the RotoViz content and tools, and it supports the podcast channel. Now, without further ado, here's the latest edition of the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. Welcome into the High Stakes Lowdown for Tuesday, December 17th, 2024. I am your host, Eric Balkman. You may know me from the Better Sports Network's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and of course the FFPC over at myffpc.com, the Fantasy Football Players Championship. So glad to have you aboard this late in the season. I know it is championship round time in both the FantasyPros Championship and the FFPC Main Event. If you do not happen to be playing in those, don't worry about it because we got the week 6. We got two things, actually multiple things for you, but two different formats going on for weeks or that start week 16. Number one is the week 16 FFPC Weekly Challenge. You can get in on that now by going to myffpc.com. That's myffpc.com. Click on Weekly Challenge and you can play for $35, $100, or $35 or $200. You can win up to $2,500 this weekend. There are no drafts. There are no salary caps you need to be worried about, no auctions, anything like that. Just build your team. No stacking, one player per team. Build a 10-player lineup or a 12-player lineup, whichever you want to do. If you want to play with kickers and defenses or not, myffpc.com is where to go. It is the same format as our world-famous Playoff Challenge, which we just launched this past week as well. You can enter for $35 and play up to a $100,000 grand prize, or you can enter for $200 and play for a $500,000 grand prize. Rosters are due January 11th at 1 p.m. Eastern. You don't get that extra 3 hours this year because the playoffs are going to start a little bit earlier. 1 p.m. Eastern on that first Saturday. So remember, if you normally have part of your tradition of signing up for those lineups right before the game starts and getting those teams, get them earlier this year because lineups will lock at 1 p.m. Eastern this year. That's myffpc.com, where to go for the world-famous FFPC Playoff Challenge. Want to welcome in a guy tonight who is not only in contention for a pair of $1 million grand prizes, but he's battling for a six-figure grand prize in best ball with the FFPC as well. He's been on this show before. He has 30 league titles to his name in the FFPC. Please welcome back onto the show, Mr. Stephen Ranaghan. Stephen, what's going on, man?
Mr. Balkman, how you doing, sir?
Doing good, man. How's life treating you heading into week 16, my friend?
Not too bad. Could have been a little better, but it's got its ups and downs, but not too bad, overall.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like you always want it to be better, right? But I think and I won't reveal too much about where your teams are at, but you got teams in contention for a lot of big grand prizes, and you've already been a former $500,000 winner in the FFPC as you were the world famous Playoff Challenge winner. What was that, 3 years ago or 2 years ago? I want to say.
I think it was 3. Yep.
3 years ago. Okay, all right.
Yep.
Which is very cool. So you've done this before, but it never gets old, man. You still get the sweats. You're still, the nerve wracking of the lineups is still going on with you every single week when you pick your starters. I guess that's the beauty of best ball. You don't have to worry about it, but you can't manipulate it like you can in the main event or the FantasyPros Championship. How's it been like looking at week 16? How do you feel about your teams coming into this week?
It's good. First, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me on. I don't take these invitations lightly, so I greatly appreciate it.
Glad to have you.
Yep. Not too bad. Just just hanging in there. Just so much stuff happens that you just sort of. I've learned to kind of take it easy and just kind of see what happens. It's there's a lot of weird things happened last week. You had some zeros on the board and stuff like that. So you just never know. You kind of have a good idea of how it's going to go, but it's really hard to say for sure kind of how it's going to go. But last week I think it was a lot of high over under totals. So you would think that there would be kind of a big scoring week, and some of the weeks you look and it's everything's in the low 40s, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
I think it's I want to let's kick things off. I didn't put this on the show sheet, but you mentioned a few zeros this past week. Cooper Kupp is a big one for me on Thursday night. That was really bizarre to see. Is that just an outlier? Any concerns about Kupp going forward, given that Nakua got everything and Kupp literally got nothing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's kind of game by game situational, right? I think Kupp's kind of deteriorating a little bit, but there's kind of rumors about his legs and stuff like that. But it's so hard to tell on a game to game basis, right? I think a lot of it's matchups. Like if whatever the defensive coordinator plans, like that he wants to just clamp down on Puka and then just kind of leave Kupp alone, at different spots. But yeah, I mean, there was like Mooney got a 0. I know Waddle.
Yep.
I had some Waddles and lineups and stuff like that. Just, there's just so much upside. It's hard not to, play some of those guys, the Moonies and the Waddles. And, certain guys like that, you almost have to expect that stuff like that can happen. Not that bad, but.
Well, I'll tell you where, I mean, and this baffled me. I'm looking it up because I've heard it 3 times and I still want to make sure I'm getting this right. In that Bills-Lions game on Sunday afternoon, Stephen, 90 total points scored in that game, 48 of them by the Buffalo Bills. In this game, I'm gonna count right now. There were 9 players that got catches in that game for Buffalo. 9 players got targets. One of them was not Amari Cooper. No catches, no targets in a game that they won 48-42. I mean, with Kupp, it's a little different. I think you keep rolling him out there. But my God, Amari Cooper, you cannot count on this guy at all in the money weeks these last 2 weeks. Maybe I'm just preaching to the converted here, but this guy has to be firmly cemented on your bench. He can't even get a target in a game that they're trying to, it's a track meet, 90 points are scored. His own team scores 48. He can't get a target. I don't know what happened there, man.
Yeah, tough to, I think if you're kind of closer to the lead, it'd be tough to play something like that. If you're a little further back, maybe you could play something like that. But yeah, to your points, it's, sometimes he can come out of games injured and come back in and stuff like that. So it's takes a lot of thought, right? I think it's just kind of based on your personality, how you want to kind of approach it. If you want to roll the dice with it or you want to, kind of be a little more conservative. But yeah, I think some of it is like some of the games I watch and I'm like, man, did the offensive coordinator just decide like today it's going to be receiver 1 this day and that's it, because it looks like they don't even give some of the receivers looks at all, and I'm like, they're not hurt that bad, that they can't get a look. But anyway.
I want to ask you too with so regarding the Amari Cooper thing. I think in week 17, where it is the last week of the main event FantasyPros championship round, you're pulling out all the stops if you gotta if you're down like 150 places in the standings or even 200, 100, whatever it is. I get it. Week 15, I don't like to do that because you still have 3 weeks. Week 16 is an interesting one, though, Stephen. Like, if you are already behind 150 teams in the standings, do you start taking more chances in your starting lineup, trying to increase variance, trying to start those low floor, high ceiling type players already this week?
Yeah, the way I've looked at it in the past, I've always just sort of stuck to my system. But, now that I've talked to, players, like good players, and kind of, they give some of their thoughts on, kind of how they do things. And it does make sense, like if you're looking to try to win something or get, high up in the standings, why not roll the dice? The problem with that is sometimes I've done that and like, I'll look back and, the team that finished maybe in 41st place. And I'll think back, I remember in week 16, I played, some idiot receiver that had like 13 targets all year, So, yeah, so it's just, I don't know. Again, I think it's based off kind of like how you want to approach things, but everybody's different. That's kind of the that's why this hobby's so great. I think everybody approaches it so many different ways.
I think that, and then with the FFPC, all the different ways you can build a team with 2 flexes and only having to start 2 receivers. I think that when you take in draft philosophy, team management philosophy, player analysis, and then the way that you handle your team in the regular season, the league playoffs, and then the championship round, I think it's so compelling, and it's what makes it so fun for sure, Stephen. Let's talk about some players. Speaking of player analysis, I want to talk about the Bucs backfield. So this week, they're in Big D. They're taking on the Cowboys defense. Would you play Bucky Irving over Rachaad White? Would you play Rachaad White over Bucky Irving? If you have them both on your team, would you play them both? Are they both startable? Let's say you have White on one team and Irving on another. Are you playing both of them? Would you play neither one? Because they're going to cannibalize each other against that Cowboys defense. I know it kind of depends upon, who else you have on your team, but in a general sense, Stephen, how do you sort of feel about those running backs against the Cowboys this week?
Yeah, first of all, I think that offense looks insane. I mean, I love what they're doing. I think Baker, ever since, McVay had him for those few weeks, I think you could see like a switch go on with him. I think he was sort of getting that way, but whatever McVay worked on with him, and you could tell it, whether it was mental or, fundamentals or something, they were both. But for both of those players, if I had both and none of those, I'd play both of them. If I had one, I would play that one, or if I had one, I would play the other one. Following that team closely, it's all game script dependent. One game they're favored, by 7 and they're down by 20. So, one game they're using Irving as the catch-up back, and then another game White's going off, catching passes. Mm-hmm. So I think it's been hard to really, cement those guys in roles, like what you think they're going to be. So I wouldn't think many would have both of them, but, they may. But I think if you had one or the other, it's just I think it's a really good play, just based on the offense alone,
Speaking of that offense, another guy that's really turned it on for the Buccaneers here over the last couple of weeks is Jalen McMillan. 4 catches for 59 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Raiders. 5 catches, 75 yards, and a touchdown against the Chargers. He's really coming into his own. And quite frankly, there's a lot of best ball players that drafted this guy expecting more of this, and definitely expecting more of it when Chris Godwin went down. I'm kind of excited to see what this guy does in 2025, with assuming they keep the band together in Tampa Bay and McMillan's the number 2 receiver there. I really like him. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, it's amazing you brought him up. I probably drafted him 50 times. And had him everywhere, and it was like a slow attrition week by week. And then once I got to week 10, I was staring at the screen saying how am I not going to drop this guy now? Because I just didn't have enough players, or there was 4 guys out and I needed, more depth somewhere else. And it's just, it sucks, you got to drop guys like that, and like I said, I had 50. I probably ended up with 5 by the end of the whole process. So yeah, he looks really good, and he's in a great offense. And, he seems like more of a slot guy, but can kind of do both a little bit. But yeah, I think he's great.
I have him I've kept him on a bunch of dynasty squads, and I'm hoping that Tampa doesn't invest in a receiver on day 1 or day 2 in the draft next year, because I think McMillan could step in and have a really, really good season opposite Mike Evans for sure. We do have a question in the chat right now from Iron Daddy. Hey guys, what up, Balky? Right now sitting in the FFPC varsity number 1 at the 2 spot, varsity number 2 at the 2 spot, and varsity number 3 in the 2 spot, sitting in second place in all 3 varsities. Congratulations, Iron Daddy, on your season so far. He is asking us tonight, would we play Tim Patrick over Christian Watson this week? So thank you for the question, Iron Daddy. We appreciate it. So Tim Patrick has really been coming on. I think that's another guy similar to Jalen McMillan. He's also caught 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games. Tim Patrick, in fact, has gotten 4 for 30 and a touchdown against Buffalo, 6 for 43 and 2 touchdowns against the Packers. Before that, he had 48 yards and 55 yards. So he's been really good. However, Christian Watson has really been coming on as well. If you look at his stats over the past few, and I know, anybody who watches this show, I say it every single week, I never know whose week it's going to be. Is it going to be Dobbs? Is it going to be Reed? Is it going to be Kraft? I never know. Is it going to be Watson? Well, you look at what Watson has done. He got 3 targets, did not catch any of them in that Niners game. Packers really didn't have to throw a lot in that game. However, if you look at the other 4 games out of his last 5, 4 for 150, 2 for 67, 4 for 114, and 3 for 56. So with both of these guys here, I'm not seeing a really high floor for either one of them, but the big play potential is there. This week, Watson is playing on Monday Night Football, Stephen, against the New Orleans Saints. Tim Patrick is at Chicago. I lean towards Patrick here because, again, I don't know how much throwing the Packers are going to have to do as a 14-point favorite at Lambeau.
Yep, I would agree with you for sure. Yeah, I'm kind of kicking myself. I really liked Patrick, but sort of didn't have the spots. I did in a way, but I think he looks great. Just the touchdowns. I think, the way that offense is going to kind of change a little bit based on that injury. it seems like, they kind of open it up and it becomes very sort of, more multidimensional than, when they're trying to focus on this whole, running game, which is really successful for them. But for fantasy purposes, I think it's great for a guy like that. But I think, you can see them open it up a little more. And it seemed like they utilized Raymond a lot more in some of those games. So it seems like he's, kind of, getting into that role. He's always been a great receiver. He just can't stay healthy,
The D's right now says, love you, Steve. Hate the hat. He also says he wants you to represent the Discord chat well. And is that you? That's oof, right? I think I've seen you. You were oof a lot in the playoff challenge. A lot of those team names was oof.
Yep. Just a nickname from another community. Hello to everybody out there.
Who's tuning in tonight? To Stephen Ranaghan, local celebrity, national celebrity tonight, which is always good that we can have that. Speaking of said Ravens, Zay Flowers gets the Steelers this Saturday. Steelers took on the Eagles last week. They get the Ravens this week. How strong of a start is Zay Flowers coming off a 6-catch for 53-yard performance in a game where Mark Andrews got in the end zone, Rashad Bateman got in the end zone twice? How do you feel about Zay Flowers in the championship round, specifically Week 16 right now, Stephen?
Yeah, it's like you're reading my mind this year. Like I had so much Zay Flowers. It's scary. He was like probably my favorite wide receiver going in. He just really hasn't kind of done what I thought he would. And I think it's a combination of kind of the offensive coordinator, the team, and then, sort of Jackson, being inaccurate at times. And I think he's a little bit of a head case, not in a bad way, but I think he's just sort of, he just sort of kind of loses his mind out there at times, I think. But you got to think he's due at some point, but it's definitely confusing how they use him at times. If I was the coordinator, I would be, trying to feed him the ball any way I could. And I know they do that some games, but it just seems like they try a couple of plays of the same variety once or twice and then just completely give up on it, So I think it's a little more a function of the offense and the coordinator, and maybe some of it's Harbaugh, but I don't see any reason why you wouldn't, especially at a time like this, but I could see why people would sit him based on some of the games he's had too. So
he's been a guy over the last 7 games. Over the last 7 games, he's seen at least 6 targets every single game. He's topped 100 yards a couple of times. He's gotten in the end zone 3 times. And when you think about his season, long view of it, Lamar Jackson is an MVP candidate this year. Maybe not the front runner anymore after last week. Maybe he still is. I don't know. And then you had the Deontay Johnson trade, and you think like, oh, that's great about Jackson. Sucks for Johnson. But now Johnson's gone, and he hasn't been playing, and he's not on the team anymore. You'd think there'd be more there for Flowers, but I think Derrick Henry has taken a lot away from what you could have expected from Flowers this year. I'm with you. I have him on a good amount of teams, and it's been frustrating. The floor at least always seems to be there. Like, even the Pittsburgh game, 2 catches for 39 yards, but he got in the end zone, right? The Tampa Bay game, I don't know what happened there. He only got 1 target. Early on, it was weird. Against the Dallas Cowboys and the Buffalo Bills, only got 4 catches combined for 30 yards in those 2 games. So I would say mostly it hasn't been feast or famine, but he has had a couple of famine games. He gets the opportunity to make some big plays against the Steelers and then rounding up the fantasy season with the Texans too. I think by and large that Ravens offense will be pretty much back as is for next year. Knowing that, or at least in that vein, Stephen, would you still be drafting a bunch of Flowers next year?
I would, yeah. I mean, I think I watched a lot of him here at Boston College. I went to a couple of games, and he was just, absolutely just burning like DBs. Just good cornerbacks too. So he's got the skill set, but I just think it's just a matter of whether Monken's still there and if he can kind of change a little bit. And there's just a lot of variables there. I watched them pretty closely. That sort of all just a confluence of things that's just not working out for him. And that stuff can change pretty quickly year to year, I think,
We should talk about this too. Iron Daddy brings this up, that everything that happened within the last 24, 36 hours in the NFL. We found out a couple hours before we came on tonight that the Falcons will be going with Michael Penix as their starting quarterback for the remainder of the season. Jameis Winston is also benched now too in Cleveland in favor of Dorian Thompson-Robinson. And Patrick Mahomes, who was supposedly, and maybe still is, dealing with a high ankle sprain, got into full practice today. We could talk about this in pieces, Stephen. Let's talk about Atlanta first. Your thoughts on Penix and maybe not so much on Penix, but how does this affect guys like Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson going forward? Is this a step up or a step back for those guys?
Yeah, I think the way Cousins is, that game last night, he looked pathetic. That was just, he looks like he's hurt, but, you've never really seen him throw passes like that. Like, he's been inaccurate at times, but not throwing the ball like whatever they said, like 59 miles an hour or something.
Yeah.
Was, but yeah, I would think he should be able to help. It's just whether or not it's, he could have a good connection with like Pitts or something, you know what I mean? And Pitts goes off, but, I don't think it could be any worse really than the past 6 weeks. And then, you just never know. I think Penix, he's definitely good. He's, they say he's got a really good sort of makeup to him and everything. So you just never know stuff like that. Like I said, I think it will be better than what it has been.
It's going to be interesting to see, too, because you think about who he was throwing to at Washington in college. It was Jalen Polk. It was Jalen McMillan, right? It was Rome Odunze, all three guys who are playing in the NFL right now. And his offensive coordinator there is now the offensive coordinator for the Seahawks, too. So I'm sure Penix was the beneficiary of a lot of great talent around him. We'll see how much talent he had, too, when he gets, starts slinging the ball around this week. Atlanta, God, I should have this in front of me and I don't. Atlanta is at home against the New York Giants. So this should be a nice, you would think, soft spot for Penix to kick off his NFL career. Moving to Cleveland, Stephen, I think it was Jason Moore from the Fantasy Footballers. I could be wrong, but he said this was horrible for fantasy football when you consider DTR stepping in for Winston. He said it was a death knell, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically this is horrible for Elijah Moore, Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, David Njoku. Are you seeing it the same way? Because I think a lot of these Browns guys, maybe except for Jeudy, were borderline starts the last couple of weeks, and now you look at it, it's like, okay, maybe I got to bench these guys, given that there's a quarterback in there now for the Browns who just does not pump the ball downfield as much as Winston did.
Yeah, I just don't know what these GMs look at or watch. Sometimes I say to myself, man, I think I could run the team almost as good, and I don't have any experience running teams, You just watch it and you say, what in the world could you be thinking? Because, do they want to see what he is? They've already seen what he is. He's been awful, and, Winston can, absolutely implode in games, but at least you have a shot, I think, they were trying to do the same thing with Flacco. He was showing how great he was in the offense last year, and they were trying to bench him. And I think it took, someone to get hurt for him to get back in, and then he's going nuts again, But it's just, I guess the organization is just so screwed up that they, but, maybe there's some other reason, maybe draft position or something. I don't know,
The other thing that will bring up Patrick Mahomes' full practice. He's going to be hobbled. We've seen him hobbled before. Obviously, you're still playing Kelsey. You're probably still playing Hopkins. But outside of that, Worthy, I think gets to be more interesting. Smith-Schuster, I think, is a guy you're probably sitting. And then that Chiefs running game does what are you doing with Mahomes if you have him? Would you be sitting him in favor of let me bring up a few options here, in favor of Brock Purdy, in favor of Sam Darnold, in favor of Anthony Richardson is another guy too that I think, knowing that Mahomes is, if he plays, he's going to be hurt and he's on a short week this week as well.
Yeah, I absolutely would be sitting Mahomes. I think in the offseason, Tyreek Hill was joking, but he said that Tua Tagovailoa was more accurate than Mahomes. And I sort of laughed, but now that I watch, he might have a point actually. Tua does some weird things, but and especially with, Mahomes being hurt, it just doesn't seem like something I would do. But, obviously, I think, Mahomes is just a different player once the playoffs start. But regular season, I think it's just more of the system, I think, that Reed is, running and all that.
Let's go to a question from Ray C on YouTube, a running back question here. Now, we already talked a little bit about Rachaad White, but he's facing in week 16 a tough call here. I'm assuming he can only play one of these guys. Rachaad White at the Cowboys. Najee Harris this week, who is taking on the Ravens, and I believe that's a Saturday game as well. Or Tyrone Tracy, who is taking on the aforementioned Falcons. If you had one, or if you had the choice between one of those three, Stephen, who would it be?
Oh boy, I'd probably say just White because of the offense. Harris seems to have big games. I'm not a big Najee Harris fan, and I think Tracy's great, but now like Singletary was complaining that he wasn't getting the ball, so it just seems like that's going to go the wrong way. But like I was saying to somebody today, it's just like it's so hard to have running back depth. I guess if you have the depth, it's it's good to even just have those decisions to make.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, at this time of year, I mean, like unless you're churning those running backs every single week, man, it's tough to have depth because you really got to be on top of it. I would agree with you. I think it's White here. You've sold me on the Buccaneers offense. Not that it was a tough sell job, but what they've been able to do the last few weeks has been pretty amazing. And really, from a season long standpoint, the Singletary scares the heck out of me in regards to Tracy this week. Harris, I think it's closer because I do think, if I remember correctly, I think he can run on the Ravens pretty good this year. Jalen Warren has been getting more and more involved, and Harris wasn't all that great last week. And I know Philly's got a tough rush defense, but I think White's the play here for me. Let's go back to talk about my Packers here, Stephen. Jaden Reed, I went from thinking about if there was one Packers wide receiver that I'm playing every single week, it's Jaden Reed, to over the last month saying, God, I think he's just like the rest of them now, whether it's because how the Packers are using him, whether it's because he's just not making plays. I don't know. But if you look at the numbers of what he's been able to do or not been able to do over the last month, and I know they tried to get him a little bit more involved in Seattle, but the numbers still weren't there. They host the Saints. They're a 2-touchdown favorite on Monday night. When you need points, is Jaden Reed almost close to being a must-sit this week as opposed to being a must-start like it was for most of the season?
Yeah, I mean, that offense is just, I totally pegged it wrong. I thought, they'd be throwing the ball. They just are not. They just run the ball like crazy, maybe they just, I think for it to work out, they need to get into a game where they're down, 20-0 or something, and he could have a big game. But I think he's a great receiver. I don't know. I think some of these guys, they get, nagging injuries, and he just kind of, and I don't know if it's that he just can't get open or what, but he's had some awful games, and I've had him in for a lot of those games. And...
Yeah, me too. It's been rough. It's been rough for sure. Let's talk about a couple of things here that you had brought up. Bye weeks. We've had 2 bye-apocalypses this year with 6 teams on bye. It's been rough. It's been rough for a lot of people. Can you talk a little bit about how you handled them in drafts and then your experience managing your teams dealing with these bye weeks in 2024?
Yeah, I think this is a huge thing this year. I think, when I was drafting during the summer, I started and I didn't have any plan whatsoever. And usually I have a pretty good idea what I'm going to do. And I just was kind of in the first week, and I was just, I'd look at it, I'm like, what am I doing? I don't really have any idea what I'm doing here. And it was those bye weeks where it just screwing me up because all the teams that I loved, which I'm sure a lot of people were in this boat, I look and it's like every team that had a week 14 bye was just, up and coming teams with sleepers that I liked. And same with week 12 to a degree. And it was just like, I just had to make a decision and just say, like, at some point, like, screw this. I'm just going to just take the players I like. I don't care what weeks they have. Because I'm not going to not draft a guy, I know some of it's championship weeks, and I'm sitting there watching the guy go off. And just because, he had some bye week, I just made a decision one day. I said, this is the way I have to go. But it really kind of screwed up drafting this year, like more than any year I've ever seen. Just with that many like great teams on buys, like all in the same weeks. I mean, it even affected me in waivers. I'd be looking to add somebody, and I would be like, oh my God, man, this guy's got a week 14 and I have like 7 week or whatever week it is, and yeah, I don't ever remember that happening that badly, like you obviously you have some weeks where it's pretty bad, but it was just, has your company ever thought about doing like a late week 17 waiver? I always wonder that, but
I can tell you based on my knowledge, probably not, but I can't say that for certainty. I would say probably not. That said, I mean, we'll send out our survey here for the FFPC in the next month or so, where we're always looking for feedback from players and seeing if there's any way we can improve the experience, and that might be something we could do. I don't know. Yeah, I go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I just think it's, we got players spending money and not, it's not a knock at all. It's just like a suggestion, like you said, where, I get the point of it. It's like you got a plan, but it's like, man, with so many injuries and stuff, and granted, there wouldn't be much on the waiver wire, but at least someone that loses.
There'd be warm bodies. There'd be guys
that some tight end that gets eight points, but you end up losing by 1, but at least you had a chance because you just picked up some scrub tight end that got like 4 catches or something. But anyway, it was just something, along with buys. But, on your future shows, I would love to understand that. I never hear, or maybe I just missed it. I never hear people talking about strategy around that. That's one thing I don't, because I think a lot of it's just luck and chance. I mean, you can plan it too, but a lot of times when you plan it, it doesn't work out the way you thought it was 12 weeks before,
And that's always been my take on it. I think to your point, week 14 this year, when you look at the teams and the players that were missing, Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, Bo Nix, who's really been coming on, Cortland Sutton was missing, the Denver Broncos defense. You had Nico Collins on a bye, Mixon, Jonathan Taylor, Ramondre Stevenson, and then the Commanders too, McLaurin, Jane Daniels, Zach Ertz. I mean, all those, that's a lot of significant players that were having really good seasons. Yep. I think as far as how I've always handled it, maybe I should bring this up with my guests a little bit more. I have a plan, and I've drafted according to that plan, and so much stuff happens throughout the season that when I thought I would be covered for a certain buy, I wasn't, or I thought I was going to be in a lot of trouble, and I wasn't, because injuries happen and stuff happens and the waiver wire happens. So for me, it's just like my whole thing is just kind of what you did this year, Stephen, is like draft the best players. I kind of don't even look at buys a whole lot anymore. I just can't, because I'm just obsessed with trying to get the best players, the highest ceilings on my team. And I play in the KFFSC for the majority of my team. So I'm looking for these spike week guys, the final 3 weeks of the season. And sometimes you can predict. I mean, think about Bills Lions. There's a lot of people that probably were drafting Bills and Lions based on, them having this week 15 game, or at least breaking ties in favor of those players. But sometimes those matchups don't work out too. So it's just, there's so much other stuff to worry about for me when I'm drafting. The bye week stuff, it just, for whatever reason, and maybe wrongfully, it takes a back seat for me.
Yep. No, and I think, like you said, sometimes it works out great. You don't think about it, and you look back and you say, "Wow, I'm glad I didn't worry about it so much." So I think it's, I think a good amount of it's luck, but I think some of it I just never hear strategy around it. Maybe people don't want to tell their strategy, which I understand too.
Well, that's the other thing too. It's like sometimes it's tough enough getting guests on the show that will be willing to share a lot of stuff, or they'll protect it, or they'll purposely lead people in a different direction.
Right. Oh yeah.
But it's all in good fun. I want to talk about quarterbacks and how you handled drafting the position in 2024. Historically, I've always been a guy that waits on quarterback in single quarterback leagues. This year, I don't know. I feel like I drafted Jaden Daniels a little bit earlier than I normally would have drafted my first or second quarterback, and it's worked out for Daniels. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned this season drafting quarterbacks and how you're going to apply that for next season? Because I think we've seen ebbs and flows with high stakes players drafting this position high, letting them slip over the last couple of years. It's been different the last couple of years. Yeah.
I have some points that I think I understand pretty well. And then there's others that it's just like, I always, in the recent past, I've always just kind of waited for a quarterback, but I think it's really, it's got to be the right quarterback. I think that's not the case anymore at all. Just because some of these quarterbacks are just, they're going absolutely nuts, so you can't, you miss out on that. You're just, you could have a great team and you just have kind of like a middling quarterback that had a good regular season. It's like, you're done before you even start,
Right.
Yeah. So, I think that's another like great, I think that's a huge piece that people just sort of don't think about enough. Kind of, how they really want to approach it. And, I guess, if you're playing a lot of teams, you can sort of approach it in different ways. But, I think it's really, you got to really kind of look at that and determine, what quarterbacks that you do like. And then there's the theory that, you can wait and, you can really get a really nice team when you do that too. So
I think that the thing of it is, and it's just like everything, if you hit on that position and you wait on it, then you are in a really, really good spot. And I think about, I should bring up the draft ADP right now, which I'm going to do. But the first guy that comes to mind this year, and he did rise up towards the end of drafting season. He did rise up a little bit, and that was Jaden Daniels. But I think for the majority of drafting season, most of the summer, I mean, this is a player that was going fairly late. He ended up going at the end of the 9th round at quarterback 8, which is still a great value when the drafting season ended Sunday morning of week 1. But you think about some of these other quarterbacks that you could wait on that you got right. Joe Burrow was drafted after Jaden Daniels this year. Brock Purdy drafted later. Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff was quarterback 15. Jordan Love was quarterback 16. So if you hit on these guys, hey, it's great. But if you don't, and I'll bring this up too, as long as we're talking about the one-off positions.
Sure.
What about tight end this year? Brock Bowers was tight end 11. Stephen, how many times did you hammer that guy this year? Because he's going to be potentially the number 1 overall pick in 2025. We'll get to that in a little bit. But tight end, I think it's similar, right? If you wait on the position and you hit on it and your running backs and receivers stay healthy, you got a really good shot at $1 million.
Yep. Yeah. I think both of them, it's a little more confusing than it was, say, 5 years ago,
I think the other thing too, and we'll tackle this plenty in the offseason, going to be fascinating to see how FFPC players handle the tight end position next year because of so many guys that have let them down. Laporta, Kincaid, Kelsey, likely for some people, Engram, Kyle Pitts, all those guys were so bad and they were all, basically third round or higher picks. I wonder if the quarterbacks move up next year and the tight ends fall a little bit. You had George Kittle, who was the tight end 8, who's been great. Brock Bowers, tight end 11. Really the only early tight end that's worked out to the level that people expected him to was Trey McBride. And he hasn't scored a receiving touchdown yet this year. So it's just another anomaly. That's just really bizarre stuff.
Yep.
We talked about the Mahomes injury and whether he's going to play for the Chiefs. What about Hollywood Brown, who could make his way back this week? He's a tough start in week 16. But if we see him get in the neighborhood of 8 or 9 targets here this week and Mahomes plays, what about keeping him on your roster for week 17? Do you want to keep him around and maybe sneak him in as one of your flexes in the main event or the Fantasy Pros Championship? Your thoughts on Hollywood Brown specifically for the remainder of 2024, Stephen?
Yeah, I think that's a good, I think kind of, speculating on him for a season long, availability is a little tough at times, but he's a great receiver. He's just always hurt. But for something like that, where you're, it's kind of a 3-week thing, I don't see any downside to it whatsoever,
You want to keep these upside guys on your team. He's an upside guy. And he's a player that could go off. Again, if he doesn't show us anything in week 16, he's going to be a tough start in week 17. Sure. Unless you are, again, shooting for the moon and you have to move up all those spots, then I could see it too. The other big injury that happened this past week was in that Lions-Bills game. David Montgomery out for the season with a sprained or torn MCL. So it's going to be the Jahmyr Gibbs show. Now, Sion Vaki, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name, and Craig Reynolds obviously will figure in to the Lions' running game plans. But I think one of the things that made that Detroit offense so good was that 1-2 punch, that thunder and lightning combo of Montgomery and Gibbs. And now it's going to be the Gibbs show. Does the Montgomery offense get replaced piecemeal by Williams, by St. Brown, by Laporta, by Gibbs? Is it just going to be Gibbs for the win, where he is going to get these massive 25-touch weeks or 30-touch weeks with no Montgomery? How does the Lions offense change? How do you envision it changing with Montgomery now no longer a part of the equation for 2024?
Yeah, I think it definitely will change. Just because they know, they kind of, I don't think they should, run Gibbs up the middle like they ran Montgomery. So I think it should change. I don't know. Campbell seems like a moron at times, so I don't know what he'll do. And I know
he's bold. He's a bold guy. He's a bold. Right. I was talking about this today, on my local radio show. I said, if I'm a Lions fan, I'm sure Campbell gives me heartburn from time to time. But as a football fan, man, I love it. I love seeing it's so fun. I mean, it can be maddening for fantasy times, but sometimes. Yes. But man, are the Lions fun to watch, and he's part of it.
Yep. No, he definitely is, and I'm kidding, a bit. But yeah, like you said, for fantasy, it can drive me nuts. You're like, oh no, come on, don't do this, and then he does it. But I think you'll see a little bit more kind of. It seems like Laporta's coming on, and then, utilizing Williams a little more and stuff like that. And then Patrick, like you said, it's just, I think you'll see sort of like a little bit of a different offense. They have a tough matchup, though, with the Jalen Johnson and probably in the cold and all that. But
And the thing is, like, and I said this too, I think the Lions are one of the most well-coached teams in the league. Something I never thought I would say after I watched Hard Knocks a couple years ago. I'm like, this is not going to work in Detroit. And I was totally wrong on that. Campbell's got it together. He surrounded himself by a lot of really smart guys too. So I think Detroit, even with all these injuries, I mean, they're 12-2, man. And they've just been decimated on defense. Not that I want to turn this into a Lions praise show, but they've been decimated with injuries, and they were still right in that Buffalo game. They beat Green Bay at home the week before. And I just think there's the people who are telling those guys and putting the strategy together. Ben Johnson's another big part of it. They're so good that they're going to be in the thick of it, no matter the injury issue that's going on right now.
I think you're right.
A lot of surprises this past weekend, Stephen, in week 15. Was there anything that stuck out to you that caught you off guard, that had you rethinking things for week 16? Any surprises?
Yeah, I'd say the Jets, kind of surprised me there. They just look, just so out of sorts, again, just sort of like the approach and everything. I think Rodgers is really hurt, but man, Adams, he went crazy. I think that surprised me. And then some of the down games, by some of the receivers. It seemed like a lot of running backs had bad weeks too. But I think the down weeks by the receivers is, I think the league's changing a little bit, as far as that goes, where, all those crazy defenses they're playing, like the cover 2 and stuff. And it's just, taking away so much of some of the excitement out of some of the games. I think the really good teams can still, entertain people, but you get some of these games with some of the defenses they're playing, and it's just 11-yard passes all night,
It ebbs and flows, right? And then now that we have this cover 2, running backs are back, for lack of a better term, right? We're seeing better performances from them. We're still going to see at some point these teams that are going through the playoffs. At least this is my opinion on this. That are going through the playoffs, getting deep runs in the postseason with a strong ground game, then maybe we'll see the single high safety again, where that other safety is creeping up into the box to slow this down, and that'll open things up. It's always changing, right? And I think we're probably in for a change now, where maybe running back stakes. And I'll tell you the other thing that stood out to me in 2024, we saw a lot of running backs stay healthy. We did not see a lot of running backs go down, with horrific injuries. Where the churn was that more live. And how do I know this? Because I was a big zero RB guy. Maybe not zero RB, but more hero RB, where my second running back in most of my leagues, Stephen, was like a pass catcher, or he needed somebody ahead of him to get hurt, right? Sure. And it just hasn't happened as much as I want. So I'm saddled with all these Ray Davis shares. I'm saddled with all these Blake Corums and Trey Bensons and Emmanuel Wilsons. And the guy in front of him just never went down. And that's fine. And, it works out that way sometimes. But I think that's another takeaway that I'll have at the end of 2024.
Yeah, it's like, who would have thought James Conner would still be alive?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And doing well. Had another great week in week 15. It's crazy.
Yep.
Is there one guy that well, I'm sure there's more than one. But if you could have gone back and drafted one guy in a lot more spots this year that maybe you were close to doing, but for whatever reason you just didn't draft enough of them, who would that guy be? And then a guy that you wish you just, injuries aside, a guy that for performance issues only, that you wish you would have stayed away from, that you did get a bunch of in 2024?
Yeah, I'd say the one, that really, and again, it goes back to the whole bye week thing, was McLaurin. It's like, I love McLaurin. I've had him for years, and I just didn't do it because I just, was so saturated with all those other teams, so it, that one kind of stung, just because, I've always taken him and just sort of missed on that one. And then Brian Thomas, but I have tons of him, but I wish I probably took him on 130% of my teams.
Right, exactly. You know what's funny about Thomas is, and maybe because I was such a big believer in Malik Neighbors, but I thought a big reason why Thomas was so good was having Neighbors on the opposite side of the field, was having the Heisman Trophy winner and Jaden Daniels throwing to him. So I was nervous when he got to the pros. I didn't necessarily know if I was going to see it from him. And not only have I seen it from him, I think he's leading all rookies in receiving yardage. I have him on a couple of dynasty teams. I might have him on a couple of redraft teams, but that's another guy too that, you think about the state of the Jacksonville offense this year and the injuries with Trevor Lawrence and how the season's gone. to see him shine like this gives me a lot of hope for his career and maybe a big 2025 for him as well.
Yep. Yeah. And I think Lawrence really isn't as good as what people think either. So he said,
I'm starting to believe that. Yes.
Yep. Yep. I've heard you talking on shows about him, and, and Mac Jones is, he's just not very good, but yeah, like you said, those two guys throwing to him, it's amazing.
Yeah. Michael Kenzel, thank you so much for the kind words. A Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year to you as well. We'll keep these high stakes shows going year round for you, Michael. And so this is tough. This is something that you can, that probably resonates with you, Stephen. He almost made it through the Superflex Best Ball Tournament through round one. The Keenan Allen touchdown sank him, so he missed by 1.98 points. Those are the ones that sting, man. Those close ones. I don't know how you feel about this. I'd much rather get blown out in a fantasy matchup or not even come close to advancing rather than coming this close, because those are the ones you never forget. Just irritates me to no end.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Some of them, you lose those games like 210 to 209 or something.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
You feel like you want to just like go puke or whatever. But yeah.
There was one game where it was like a Monday Night Football game. This is many years ago, and RG3 was a quarterback for the Redskins back then. And he ended up getting a couple of big pass plays early in the fourth quarter. And I basically needed like 2 rushing yards from him for the remainder of the quarter. And it was a tight game, and he played it. Never got it. Never got any more points the rest of the way, and ended up getting eliminated. I don't know if that was a championship. It might have been a championship game. I can't remember. But That one, I still remember it, just fresh as day. It's just, it totally stings. What was it like, as long as we talked about the world famous playoff challenge 3 years ago when you won the $500,000? What was that like watching the Super Bowl that year? I don't even remember how close you were on the board to everybody else. What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was pretty close. Everything was pretty bunched up, but yeah, it was. I sort of needed the game to just go one way, and it went that way. Like I needed, Brady to throw passes to like all his secondary receivers, and I know he kind of did that all throughout his career here. So I was like, there's a pretty good chance of that. But yeah, it was that was unbelievable. Like I said, you guys were great. Calling me, during the game and stuff, and yeah, your contests are awesome.
Good.
Yeah.
Glad to hear it. And I would hope they'd be awesome for the guy who won $500,000. With playing in it, you'll be back to defend your belt, or not defend your belt, but try to get your belt back in that. So that is coming up with the world famous playoff challenge. Again, myffpc.com for all you viewers out there who want to sign up for it. Registration is open right now. The 101 in 2025, Stephen, I have this just kind of came up randomly between myself and FFPC co-founder Dave Gerzak. We were just talking about this. And it's ballooned out to like, I want to ask everybody this now, all these high stakes players, and a lot can happen: free agency, the draft, injuries, playoffs, whatever. But as it stands right now, December 17th, 2024, who do you think your 101 would be in the FFPC main event? If you had the first pick in a draft for next year, who do you think you'd be taking right now?
I'd probably say it's, I'd say either Chase or Lamb, maybe.
Oh, Lamb. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think, Lamb, he's pretty much been through everything with that team's a total mess. But if they can kind of get back to where they were, I think he's, a top 3 receiver for sure. People saying Barkley, but it's just like, I'm not sure he can stay healthy for a whole year, but I could totally see how somebody could take him one. It's not, that's just me,
Right.
I'd say those two, off the top of my head, but definitely not Brock Bowers. I've heard that, but I would.
That's the one I want to bring up. I'm like, because like I've seen people take, Kelsey has been a 101 pick before, but you are not a tight end at 101. This is not a Bowers thing. This is just more of like a tight end. You wouldn't take a tight end at the 101.
Yeah, and just like that situation on that team, and it's just, if they get like Sanders and just like, I would never do that. I wouldn't even do that with Kelsey probably, although I have some Kelsey, and I hate that. I would never do that with Bowers. But again, who knows?
The other thing too that's going to be interesting is the Jamar Chase contract, right? And trying to figure that out, because that might affect, and we could be looking at maybe people getting a deal on Chase because they don't know if he's going to report week 1. I'll tell you one thing I won't be doing after taking Christian McCaffrey at the 101 in 3 leagues. If a guy is hurt, if a guy has a stubbed toe, if he has a hangnail, I'm going with somebody else, because I was 100% of the belief this McCaffrey thing. This isn't a big deal. He was even questionable for week 1 heading into Monday Night. I was starting him. I felt like he was going to play. And then all of a sudden he's out. He's going to Germany. Forget it. I'm done. Now that could come back to bite me. And maybe I'm just stinging because it's still fresh, but that's, I can't do it anymore, man.
Yeah. And that team, I think, is just, I'm happy to see them not do well, but it just seemed like so much goes on with that team, even when it's going well, it's just kind of weird stuff. But yeah, I totally agree.
Michael, at least I agree. Josh Allen, number 1 in Superflex drafts next year for sure. Stephen, let me leave you with this question from Trevor Holt in the chat right now. Let's assume FFPC Main Event, Fantasy Pros Championship, whatever, or KFFSC Main Event. How close to the leader would you need to be starting in week 17 to feel like you have a chance to win it all? Is it top 50? Is it top 40? Is it top 30? How would you feel about that, Stephen? How close do you need to be to feel like, okay, this is a real thing here? I could win $1 million.
Yeah, I'd say, I know in the FFPC regular Roto challenge there, I think it was the last, maybe that was week 16 though, but I had Lamb and St. Brown in the same game, and I was like in 177th place, and I went to like 12th place. It was just one game, but you just never really know. I would say probably in a main event, something like that. Maybe going into week 17, maybe the top 50, I would say. But again, just depends on what kind of week. Some of these weeks you see, and the teams, the players that went off all year all have down weeks, and then there's these random players that go off, and someone kind of sneaks up there from like 91st place or something like that. So I would say top 100, but I won before starting I think week 16 from like 181 or something like that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. That was different.
That was 2 weeks. That was 2 weeks to make it up, but you did it.
Yeah. It was the, Lamar rookie year, but it was, So it's just, it's not likely, but I'm sure there's somebody that will. It's just there's so many good players now, and just so many, so many good teams just sitting back there,
Dave Waters also chiming in saying if he's 50 to 75 points back, he thinks he has a chance. And yeah, for sure. 1 week to make up 75 points, not likely, but yes, there would be a chance there for sure. A guy who always has a chance to win and will have multiple chances to win. Best Ball Tournament, Main Event, Fantasy Pros Championship. Stephen, so good to pick your brain and talk ball with you. I always enjoy it. Good luck to you in all your leagues. You always seem to be floating near the top of the leaderboards in all the major contests coming in to the final couple weeks of the season. So good luck to you. I hope the ball bounces your way. We'll do this again real soon, man. Thank you so much, and a happy holiday season to you as well, my friend.
Eric, always good to talk to you, and I really appreciate you inviting me on. Really, it means a lot. I don't take it lightly, like I said, so appreciate it. Show's great too.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it, dude. We'll talk again soon.
Take care.
Later on. That is Stephen Ranaghan, ladies and gentlemen, a former $500,000 winner in the FFPC, and a guy who has 30, count them 30, FFPC High-Stakes Leagues titles to his name in his career over the last decade plus in the FFPC. That will complete our show tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I do want to let you know that there is no RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown next Tuesday because of Christmas Eve. So what I'm doing is I've moved that show to 8 p.m. Eastern time next Friday, the 27th. So we will have a lowdown. It's just not going to be until Friday of next week. And former multi-league champion in the FFPC Main Event Fantasy Pros Championship, and a guy who's right up there in the amongst the leaders in the Fantasy Pros Championship this year, Rob Linkowski, will join me again. Friday the 27th will be the next show we have for this program. However, Thursday night, we will go live at 7 p.m. Eastern for the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour on the FFPC socials, as well as the Better Sports Network. I'll be joined by Fantasy Points and FF Today's Doug Orth for 2 full hours, leading you right into at least the second quarter of that Broncos-Chargers Thursday night game as well. And then Friday night, the commish, Farrell Elliott, and I will be discussing everything Week 16 fantasy football with a guy who is sitting in the top 30 of the FantasyPros Championship right now. Guy we love to have on. He's been on plenty. Got to hang out with him in Louisville this past year, which is awesome. Tommy Island himself, Thomas Herron, will join us for Friday night's HSFF Hour Show at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Play the FFPC Weekly Challenge at myffpc.com. myffpc.com is where to go. Play with 10 or 12 team lineups 12 player lineups if you want to play with kickers and defenses or not. And you can enter for as little as $35, win up to $2,500. As a reminder, the FFPC World Famous Playoff Challenge is live right now. You can sign up for your teams. You don't know who's in the playoffs yet, so you can't build your teams. But I would get those teams squared away. Make sure you have those teams, and then you can build the lineups once the teams are announced for the playoffs and we know who's in and who's out. Again, you can enter for $35 to win $100,000, or you can enter for $200 to be like what Stephen Ranaghan did 3 years ago. 200 turned into $500,000 for him. That's myffpc.com. myffpc.com is where to go for that. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies, and get notified each and every time we go live, which will once again be Thursday night, 7 p.m. Myself and Doug Orth right here on the Better Sports Network's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. For Stephen Ranaghan, I'm Eric Balkman. This has been the RotoViz High-Stakes Lowdown. We'll see you Thursday, everybody. Thanks for watching. Thank you for listening to the High Stakes Lowdown, a RotoViz podcast brought to you by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. And thanks to Grapes for our theme music. Please review the podcast on iTunes under the RotoViz radio feed. It helps us find new listeners. Contact us via email, rotovizradio@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you think, and follow us on Twitter at RotoVizRadio. And remember, you can always support the show by subscribing to RotoViz at a 10% discount through the NFL podcast homepage, rotoviz.com/podcast.